Hello again, everyone. Edwin Leonard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about transit Mercury making a square, opposition, or inconjunct aspect to one's natal south node. Now, when we're talking about transits that involve Mercury, they can be about communications, assimilating information, mobility, siblings, cousins, neighbors, analysis. And the thing about this is when you have transit Mercury basically making an adverse aspect to one's natal south node, will this may manifest in communications, assimilating information, mobility, siblings, and cousins, neighbors, analysis. These may be things that may be a little harder, may conflict with what you're trying to go away from. Remember, the south node energy is connected with what we're trying to get away from. I'm trying to leave it behind. If there's a situation, say if you have Aries energy involved in this, there's a contentious situation that's involving you and your siblings or cousins or neighbors, it might be harder at this time maybe to extricate yourself from it at this time. Mercury's in Aries, say, could be very acerbic neighbors or cousins or siblings. Keep in mind that the transits of Mercury don't last for a very protracted period, not a very long duration. You're talking about days. They do last longer, of course, than transits of the moon. The transits of the moon last about 10 hours on average, so it's still significantly shorter than the transits of Mercury. The transits of Mercury can still hold certain significance, though, and you're going to get a number of them during the year. But anyway, also, too, the South Node is connected with our past. So it might be if we're taking short journeys at this time, maybe someone from our past, might conflict with this at this time. Maybe somebody, you get an unexpected phone call from a person you knew from yesteryear, basically, and it might preempt short journeys. Say if the transit Mercury is in Pisces, maybe it's very convoluted short journeys, or is it where you wanted to go to some fantasy place that you had never been to, or a place you fantasized about, like say like Disney World as an example. And for those of you believe in past life, it might be a time where you may feel like it's harder to remove yourself from that, from maybe somebody that may have been connected with your past. It might be, say if Capricorn is involved, it might be an authoritative kind of figure. Aquarius might be some kind of, innovator or somebody that's very radical or unorthodox as another example. Now, another thing too, keep in mind the South Node is also, though, it's what we're naturally proficient in. And the thing about it is, it might be, maybe it's harder for you to articulate these things at this time, the things that you feel you're naturally adept in. Maybe it has to do with being reticent or humble, and you're just, maybe you're just unable or you're uneasy for some reason to talk about these things, or it might just be harder to verbalize it at this time. It might be something about the way you're thinking. Maybe it's conflicting with what you might be naturally adept in. Say if the transit Mercury is in Taurus, Taurus is very stolid energy. It can be stagnant. It's very about, it can be a little bit monotonous and stale. It doesn't, waver much. It's more about the true and the tried. And then, say if it's square, the transit is square in your natal south node in Aquarius. It might be a conflict with that, and maybe doing something it's a little bit more creative or ingenious, or going outside the box, basically. Another thing too, the South Node could also be to what's affects us to our detriment. So it might be a time. It might be, maybe it's more difficult to do, to talk about these things, that might have been maybe to your detriment. Maybe it could also be maybe siblings, cousins, neighbors, might be having a negative impact on you at this time, might be bringing out maybe the worst qualities of your south node. Say if the south node is in Taurus as an example, it might be bringing out very, stubborn or obstinate qualities, or ones that are connected with greed and avarice. Um, this is also, the south node is also connected with overdeveloped and redundant qualities and attributes. So it can be a time too when you have this transit that you might be, it might be harder to communicate these things. It might be a situation where maybe, siblings, cousins, or neighbors may be bringing this out. Maybe you're having difficulty analyzing these qualities, and understanding why you have them. Say if the south node is in Virgo, it might be some kind of hypochondriac qualities, or just an overly negative or pessimistic outlook. Somebody that's wants to clean compulsively. Say if the south node in Virgo is in the 8th house, that could be a good example for a person that might want to clean compulsively. I would say the 8th house is connected with our compulsions and our obsessions because it's the house of Scorpio. Now, another thing too is that the south node is also connected with the very negative manifestation, the expression of the placement. So it might be a time where you don't really, you might not feel like talking about, your negatives as far as the placement goes. It's something that you might want to keep under lock and key, or keep concealed more so than usual at this time. It might not be where you might not be overly comfortable in articulating these things or thinking about that energy at this time. Say if the south node is in Aries, it might be some very abrupt qualities, or overly outspoken, or even militant energy, overly combative energy that you just don't really feel like getting into at this time. And maybe you might have people, people from your early educations, neighbors, cousins, siblings, people prominent in your short journeys might be reminding you of these things, and it might be affecting you very negatively at this time. Now, another thing too, it's also another way that this transit may manifest. It could be going back to siblings, cousins, and neighbors. They may be averse to those redundant, overdeveloped qualities that are connected with the south node placement. And going back to the south node in Virgo as an example, say if the south node in Virgo is in the 11th house, it could be maybe overanalyzing, which is Virgo, perhaps astrology, which is the 11th, such as trying to find the Dwad within the Dwad in a horoscope. Could also be that local transportation issues may conflict with what you're trying to get away from. Now, say if the south node, for example, your natal south node is in Capricorn in the 3rd house, it could be maybe it's some kind of limiting or depressing neighborhood, or maybe your neighbors have had an effect on some kind of limitation at this time in your life. Maybe your life's been dominated by them as an example. It could also be, another way this transit may be expressed, it may be harder to get the news maybe to a person that was prominent in your past. Now, say for example, if the transit Mercury is in Aries, maybe it's the news of some kind of something that was volatile or violence or a fire, or maybe even something pioneering you may have done. Maybe it was a fight you got into. Now, another thing, another example, another way this transit may manifest, it could also be more difficulty in articulating and verbalizing, the energy, as far as the south node goes. And it might be, in the south node, that might, of course, that could be energy that might be affecting you to your detriment. If the south node is in Gemini, as an example, it might be issues with dissipating yourself through lack of an integrating purpose. And also, to keep in mind that there can be, anatomically speaking, Mercury is connected with the hands, the lungs. Hold on a moment, people. Keep in mind that Mercury is connected again with the hands, the lungs, breathing, nerves, arms, hands. It can be issues like as far as that goes. It might be more difficulty maybe getting away from those issues and trying to leave them in the past, or perhaps it might be giving you difficulty in doing the things that you're naturally adept or proficient in. Now, say if the South Node is an Aquarius, it might be some kind of electrical wiring or computer electronic work. Maybe it's innovating. If it's in Gemini, it might be doing something that really requires a strong use of the hands and manual dexterity, such as auto or refrigeration mechanics or writing or journalism, communications field in general. Anyway, people, that will conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin learned and stay well.